Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of Policy Watch with me, Rausan Pereira. The Civil Aviation Ministry on Tuesday notified the draft of the passenger charter. The passenger charter is open for public consultation and will be operational in a month's time. Addressing the media, Civil Aviation Minister Sanat said that the draft lists measures for ensuring safety and security of passengers. This includes refund of the entire ticket fare if flight gets cancelled due to airline's fault and no charges on cancellation of tickets within 24 hours of booking. Though Aadhaar will be used for booking of tickets, it has not been made mandatory. The ID shown by the passenger will be added to the database. The draft also states that Wi-Fi connectivity will be available to passengers after takeoff. Airlines will get the permission for Wi-Fi service within 2 months of the application. In our first segment of Policy Watch today, we will analyze the draft Civil Aviation Citizen Charter. Joining me on the program today are TK Arun, Editor Opinion, Economic Times, and Sanat Kaul, Aviation Expert. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this edition of Policy Watch. TK Arun, I'd like to begin with you. What do you make of the charter? Do you think a move in the right direction?
Well, you see, the intention seems to be good. But as the Times of India editorial today points out, if it imposes a cost on the airlines, then the airlines will just build that cost into the fare structure. So it's not that passengers will get a much better deal by creating these kind of rides. Now, is it fair to expect the airlines to not charge a passenger for booking an airline and cancelling it? After all, there is a cost to the system. It could be regulated, it could be minimal, and even better, it could be done by competition. Now, the one issue here is that very often airlines are not at fault, rather they're hostage to the situation which they operate. Airports are crowded, they don't have space to allow a plane to land, the equipment level is not good enough. These kind of things create delays for which the airline really is not at fault. If you start penalizing the airline for that, then they'll have to pass on that cost to the passenger in terms of higher fares. Indian aviation is taking off. We are in a growth phase. We are one of the fastest growing aviation markets in the world. And the effort should be to actually increase the level of competition in this and to improve the level of infrastructure in terms of airports, their instrumentation, the level of and strength of the ATC network, equipment, all that, and training pilots to do instrument landing in all airlines. If all these things are done, and then you introduce some of these penalties on airlines for being delayed or late or inconvenience and so on and so forth, it would make much better sense.
Sure. Sanat Kaul, are airlines, being penalized unnecessarily in the Indian market, and what is the health of the civil aviation industry in the country today?
Well, the health of civil aviation industry is on the decline just now because the prices of fuel are going up, and therefore, but to say what is happening today is something to be said. It's okay because while there's growth, the passenger amenities have to be improved, and in fact, safety and security are one aspect of it, which is not part of this deal. But passenger amenities have to improve, delayed flights and so on. Now the point is, deficiency of service is a kind of term which is used. Where airline is not liable is because the fault is not of the airline, then it should be exempt. Now whether it is weather, whether it is airport facilities which are inadequate, they are not able to give a slot at the appointed time, or many other aspects, then it should not be fault of the airline. Who should pay for it? I think the ministry should decide. Maybe the airport is also equally liable for certain delays. So there is a lot to be said. But however, we are moving towards a system by which, in the world, in Europe especially, they are going for all this kind of legislation. Now the cost of all this, is it going to make a dent in the airline ticket? Of course it will. Airlines have to manage their costing based on their expenses. Now, if this is added to the expenses, it will. But at the same time, it will bring a lot more discipline to the airlines. And therefore, I think it's a good thing. The cost may be just a marginal increase, may not be an increase at all. They might absorb it. It all depends on their marketing strategies. So on the overall thing, I think it's a very good sign that this is happening. The passengers are now coming in front. Earlier, airlines were dominating in a way the policy making. Now the passengers are being considered. So it's a very healthy sign which is happening in this country, and I think we should encourage it. At the same time, it should not be only airlines which should be at fault. They should make sure that the airlines are penalized only when the fault of the airline is there. Supposing an airline is not able to take off because of the technical hitch, it is their fault. But if the weather is such that they are not able to take off, that is not their fault. So they have to decide what is deficiency of service for an airline, and then decide on the various penalties and things that they offer. The second thing which I want to say is about who will manage all this. There's a huge growth of passengers. Delhi is hitting 60 million, I think. All cities are growing. Passenger traffic is double digit. Passenger traffic increase is double digit. Therefore, who will decide what is happening when? And therefore, I have always said that there should be now an ombudsman for the passengers, for the airline passengers.
Okay, point taken.
Because an ombudsman is one person who can decide the case. He can have, this will be his full-time job, he or his panel of ombudsman, like it is being done for insurance. And it is being done, I think, in some other sectors also. So it's time that there should be a separate body to look into passenger issues.
Fair enough.
Therefore, I think while it is in the direct, the move is in the right direction, there is a need to look into the various aspects of the industry where implementation should not be a roadblock.
All right.
Thank you.
Do we need an ombudsman first and foremost? Secondly, there's no doubt that the civil aviation sector is booming in the country in terms of the number of passengers that they were getting on a daily basis, and it's only set to rise even further in the years to come. Do we have the requisite infrastructure, TK Arun, to deal with the influx of air passengers?
Yes and no. Actually, we have a large number of small airports which were built for war purposes during the British era. Some were built by the kings and very rich individuals, and these are not being fully utilized as secondary airports in smaller towns. If you can bring them all onto an operational plane and use them for the regional connectivity.
But how many flyers will we actually have from those sectors?
Oh yes, plenty. You don't understand. Thanks to the boom in mining, there are a lot of places where there are people who actually need to travel in a hurry and can afford to travel in a hurry, but are constrained. They might have to travel to two cities in order to reach their final destination because there is no direct connectivity. Now, there is scope for regional connectivity, and the main thing there should be actually to build the airport infrastructure. If you build the airport infrastructure, then there's no reason why airlines won't come forward to satisfy the market demand. So the main focus has to be on building airports, creating a large enough cadre of air traffic managers and their regulatory capabilities and instrumentation, investing in proper instrumentation and radars and all that, so that the spread of our aviation infrastructure really grows. Now, in Delhi, in Mumbai, the airports are reaching their capacity, and of course, there is a plan to build one more runway. There is a plan to build another airport in Jowar in Noida. But the fact remains, for a globalizing country like India, the Indian air traffic passenger is still underserved. You go to Singapore. From Singapore, you can travel to any part in the world. In India, if you want to travel to any part in the world, you'll go to Singapore or to Dubai. So, this is making our airports lose the status of a global hub. So, Indian passengers are actually feeding the transport services from hubs like Dubai and Singapore. Now, what can be done to change this? Why shouldn't Indian traffic cater to Indian airports and better serve Indian airlines? And I think for this, we need to have a larger holistic overhaul of our aviation policy, including in more liberal allocation of bilateral rights, so that they come and take people directly from India,
Right.
rather than from international hubs.
Sure. Sanat, Kaul, that there was talk a couple of weeks ago about how mobile calls are going to be allowed from flights when they are flying, and also Wi-Fi services will be provided on board during flight. It seems like we are headed towards better in-flight services on the whole, and probably could match global standards. Is that the right way forward?
Of course it is. The global standards are that, internet is coming into the aircraft and at that height, and we also must adopt it. It's all, the technology is there. It's just a matter of putting that technology to use. Therefore, there is no two arguments on that subject. The permission to use internet and is very much awaited in India, as it has been going on in other parts of the world, and therefore I think it's the most welcome thing that has happened.
Right. Okay. Quick closing comment now from TK Arun,
Yeah.
On what's in store for the civil aviation sector in the days to come.
It's a very bright future for India's civil aviation sector. It will grow in terms of quantity, volumes. We are already growing at some 20%. Perhaps a slight decline, but at 20% is a comfortable level for progress. In terms of quality of passenger amenities, which is a function of competition, and there is scope for more airlines. While we are seeing some airlines in serious trouble, we are also seeing some other airlines do much better, right? So there is scope for fresh competition in the sector, and I think that competition is the surest route to better servicing of passengers.
All right. Yes, Dr. Kaul.
Yeah, I think our main worry should be about infrastructure. With the kind of growth that we are having in aviation sector, will the infrastructure be adequate to meet the requirement? And I'm more talking about air navigation services. We are talking about the airport facilities of landing, slots, parking. Then, of course, we have things like MRO, maintenance and repair organization.
All right. Okay. These are the things that we need to concentrate on, and these are the focus areas really going forward, is what our panelists are saying. It's time for a short break now, but still to come. Cabinet clears ordinance for amendments to Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. We'll discuss that on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Thank you to both my guests for joining me on this segment of Policy Watch.
चार साल मोदी सरकार। आज मिलिए केंद्रीय राज्य मंत्री सूक्ष्म लघु और मध्यम उद्यम मंत्रालय गिरिराज सिंह से।
ईज ऑफ डूइंग बिजनेस में पूरी दुनिया में 3 मिनट में सेल्फ रजिस्ट्रेशन करने का भारत ने ही एक दिया। पहले खादी फॉर नेशन था, फिर कहा खादी फॉर फैशन, अब खादी फॉर ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन। 10 करोड़ लोगों को रोजगार का लाइव असेसमेंट, लेकिन उसकी एक सच्चाई, 70% रोजगार 10,000 से नीचे का है। प्रोडक्ट हमारा डोमेस्टिक और इंटरनेशनल मार्केट में कम्पिटिटिव हो, और आज कम्पिटिटिव हो रहा है दुनिया के हर देश में। कई प्रोडक्ट में मैं चाइना से कम्पीट मेरे एंटरप्रेन्योर कर रहे हैं।
एक मुलाकात सिर्फ राज्यसभा टेलीविजन पर। चार साल मोदी सरकार। जब शरीर से ना हो काम, तब भी जिंदगी में रहे आराम।
इससे जो प्राइवेट जॉब वाला बंदा भी है वो भी सिक्योर हो सकता है।
अटल पेंशन से ये मुझे फ़ायदा है कि जब मैं 60 का हो जाऊंगा तो मेरी एक फिक्स इनकम हो जाएगी 4000।
इस जैसी योजनाओं को जब तक हम बाध्य नहीं करेंगे, अनिवार्य नहीं करेंगे, तो ये इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं होगी।
देखिए 4 साल मोदी सरकार सिर्फ राज्यसभा टेलीविजन पर।
Welcome back. You're watching Policy Watch with me, Rausan Pereira. The Cabinet on Wednesday approved promulgation of an ordinance to amend the 16-month-old Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which proposes to classify home buyers as financial creditors at par with lenders to help them quickly get refunds from defaulting companies. The amendment comes months after a new Section 29A was added into the Bankruptcy Code in November, introducing 4 layers of ineligibility for potential bidders. The present amendment is based on recommendations of a 14-member government-appointed committee that had last month suggested a slew of measures, including addressing woes of home buyers and making recoveries easier for lenders. In our next segment of Policy Watch, we will analyze the IBC Ordinance. Still with me on the program now is TK Arun, editor, Opinion Economic Times, and joining us in the studio is Dr. Arvind Virmani, former Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India. Dr. Virmani, I'd like to start this segment with you. What do you make of the IBC Ordinance? Whom is it going to help?
So, just to give a little perspective, you know, in developed countries where we adapted some of our code from, they have well-developed capital markets which finance construction, house buying and everything. So, part of the issue was that perhaps initially we didn't pay attention, but that's inevitable when such a big reform is happening. That in India, implicitly the buyer of the house is lending money to the construction company. Because it's unusual, it's in emerging markets and developing countries this happens, not in developed countries. So there was this lacuna. So I'm very happy that given our circumstances where this happens, it's important to recognize that you are implicitly a lender. So this will clearly facilitate both the construction sector and house buying by individuals. So it should be beneficial to both parties, because it also makes it easier for somebody like me, you know, it will become less risky. So if I want to, otherwise I might have hesitated, you know, somebody who knows that there is this problem would have hesitated in putting down money to start with and making payments every 6 months or 3 months. It will make it less risky for me, and therefore I'm more likely to do it. So it will be good all around.
Sure. TK Arun, where does this leave the builders who are already in the dock?
No, it doesn't affect the builders. Well, in the sense that they have to pay the home buyers also. But a home buyer is not just an individual buyer. Standing behind him is a bank which has lent him housing finance. So actually a real estate company is owes money to 2 sets of creditors. One, the banks from which it has borrowed money to buy the land, to build a property, etc. Plus, it has taken money from another set of banks, routed through the home buyer, who has borrowed money from the bank and has given to the builder. So both sets of creditors are now addressed by recognizing the homeowner, home purchaser, also as a mainline creditor. So this is a good move which lends greater strength to the entire financial sector.
Sure.
But these are not the only amendments. There are other amendments.
Right.
One relates to relaxing this condition that a promoter of a defaulting company cannot bid in the case of an MSME. This is a good thing, because in the case of many small and medium enterprises, there might be no other bidder, because there is nothing very unique or valuable about the asset of this business or the business model, and nobody else might be interested in it. So here, if the promoter himself is willing to put up some cash and rebuild that business, it might be much better than allowing it to go down under completely. The bank will be better off, the MSME will be better off, its employers, suppliers, buyers, everybody will be better off. So that is a very sensible thing. What I don't really like is the more stringent conditions on related parties in the case of larger companies. Now, how does the public benefit from this IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code? The creditors, which are the banks, most of them are public sector banks. If they lose money, then the burden falls on the exchequer and then the taxpayer, you and me.
Yes.
So the public policy goal is to minimize the haircut that banks have to take while resolving a bad asset. That is to maximize the value of the asset, and that will reduce the burden on the taxpayer.
Taxpayer, yes.
How do you maximize the value? That is by maximizing market participation in the market for the assets being sold. So if you restrict participation in that market, you are actually contributing to lowering the value. If you say that the promoter or the related party, etc., will not be allowed to take part in the bid, you are taking out one set of bidders. See, here the idea should be to maximize the value of this asset being sold. And two things are required. One, the current system of very limited bidding should go. There should be unlimited bidding till only one party stays in the field, just as happens in the auction for spectrum. Why not continuous bidding?
Right.
That is one thing. Second thing is, why restrict eligibility? You're not, this is not a marriage where you look at the horoscope of somebody. You are looking at somebody putting up cash. That's all that counts. And if you maximize the participation and try to increase the value through continuous bidding, that will serve you better than saying that no, these two guys, he doesn't look good, he'll not bid.
Right, Dr. Virmani. Very good analysis there by T.K. Arun. I want to know what your thoughts are.
So, in auction theory, there are well-known results that the larger the number of bidders up to a certain point, the better value the person gets, the asset gets. The second aspect, which he has outlined in a general way, I'm just focusing it on. The second point is that you need auction when there's some unique value, right? So, for example, auctions are most necessary, for example, in oil, because nobody is 100% sure what the value is. Something similar applies to auctioning of these assets, which is what we are discussing. But this has an assumption of a generally honest or a legal system. Unfortunately, there are in India. There has been a lot of hera-pheri, call it, or illegal, which complicates these things. So, though in principle, I am exactly of the same view as TK is, an old friend, but I think there can be some temporary circumstances while we clean up the system, let's say for the next 3 years or 4, 5 years, where we can have some restrictions, but one should be very careful. That general principle applies. It shouldn't be that every problem there is, we put a restriction. That will not be good in the long term.
A blanket restriction is not good in the long term.
So some of the restrictions he's pointed out, I agree. We should look at removing them at least gradually over the next 3 years.
Okay, over the next 3 years. So that's the time frame that you're looking at. You're saying the next 3 years you should remove some of these restrictions as such. T.K. Arun, as far as the lenders and the banks are concerned, does the IBC give them some teeth?
Oh yes, it does. This is going to change the way Indian capitalism works. Till now, our industrialists, promoters behaved as if public money was their money, as the banks didn't really matter. They were very confident that if you borrowed excessive sums from banks, because you inflated project costs, the money you were taking to the banks is more than you actually needed. You siphoned off some bit, padded your own fortunes, you gave some money to the politician, some to the bureaucrat, everybody is happy, living happily ever after. And if you didn't service the loan, it will be written off and he will still retain control of his company. Now that happy story has come to an end. Now people have realized that if you default on your loans to banks, you stand to lose control of your assets. Now SR is a good example. They actually were saying, while they owed 44,000 crore rupees to the banks, they will take it to IBC, they'll take part in the auctions and get the company back for around, say, 8,000 crore, minus any debt. So it is precisely this kind of a thing that Dr. Virmani is referring to prevent somebody, a promoter like that, from reclaiming an asset minus any debt. The government put in this condition that a promoter will not be allowed to take part in the bidding. My point is that it is far better to increase the participation in this bidding for the asset rather than restrict certain bidders from taking part. This is a golden opportunity for people to make money. I've been repeatedly writing, why not allow our large pension funds, the Employees Provident Fund, the National Pension System, instead to create special situation funds which will partner with operational arms of companies to take part in the bidding and buy these assets. This is patient capital which can reap huge benefits when these assets are finally sold.
Right.
Some of them are completely dead assets which will not finally take us, but most of them are actually good assets which have fallen into some difficulty for whatever reason, and once their costs are corrected, taken off, when you take off the excessive padding in their costs, these are extremely good projects. The steel projects, power projects, cement plants, road projects, all of them are very good. So you just need to finance their recovery while they are going through this difficult process of re-engineering their finances. Somebody needs to invest in them and stay with them.
Right.
That's all. And if you allow this IBC process to do this process, and private equity, other forms of patient capital take part in this process, everybody will come out better off.
Indeed. Dr. Virmani, taking the discussion forward now, does it partly resolve our NPA problem?
Should we come back to the housing stuff?
Yeah,
or
okay.
generally? No, okay. So let's go back to the housing part for a minute. I think, you know, the real estate sector is stressed partly for good reasons, you know, this whole black money issue, etc., which we've discussed on earlier programs. So I think the timeliness I should emphasize, because we need to use this period when the sector is low, you know, to remove some of these restrictions. You know, we've done enough on the black money side. Now we should look carefully at removing restrictions and facilitating the development of this market in a wide framework, so to say. So I would say that somebody who's specialized in this sector must go and look at these things and urge the government to do it. I am not an expert on the sector itself.
Right.
Now, more generally, yes, I think kind of as a conclusion, the IPC is really a very, very important reform, as TK and many others have said. And really, you know, I was participating when the previous government brought in this the new corporate act, companies law, and I was horrified that they didn't have a bankruptcy portion in it. It was really sad. So if you look at it in that context, where people told them to put and they didn't put, you really recognize the enormity of this change. You know, that they were hesitant even to put in a bankruptcy provision in this company's law, which would be natural. So it really is like the GST. GST had many problems. I'm sure this will not be immediately 100% successful, but I think it's a very important reform.
Important long-term goals are to be kept in the know, is what you're saying. Quick closing, concluding remark from you, TK Arun.
Yeah. This is, as I said, it changes fundamentally the way Indian capitalism works for the better. The laws and rules, they will take some time to stabilize. I'm not surprised that there have been 2 sets of ordinances in the IBC, and the rules should still change to allow continuous bidding of the assets till the best value is recognized.
Sure.
You shouldn't have a situation where a better value is being discovered outside the IBC process. Rather, it should take place within the IBC process.
Indeed. All right. On that note, then, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Policy Watch. Before I go, let me tell you that you can share your feedback with us as well. Our email ID is policywatch.feedback@gmail.com. You can share your feedback on Twitter as well, using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha Television. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Policy Watch. See you again next time.